A new Locked On NHL Prospects mock draft is up. So who do our experts have the Seattle Kraken taking at 8?
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Seattle hockey fans, welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team every single day. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination, your first listen, your last listen, or you listen on your way home. Either way, we're grateful to have you. And my name, if we're meeting for the first time, is Erica L. Ayala, your host of Locked On Kraken since the very beginning. I'm also a contributor to CBS Sports, where I cover a little bit of hockey, but mostly women's basketball, college, international, and of course, the WNBA. Now, the Locked On NHL Prospects show is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Again, your team every day, or your topic every day. And we got to hear from our expert, Sebastian. He ran through his most recent mock draft for all 32 picks, so the first round. And of course, we want to know who Sebastian thinks the Seattle Kraken should take with pick number 8. Now, a little bit of background here. We've talked about this throughout the Locked On Kraken seasons, throughout the Seattle Kraken seasons, that Ron Francis, former general manager, now president of hockey operations. Yes, I've talked about that as well. Anyway, Ron Francis has always talked about building up the middle. So the Seattle Kraken have taken a lot of centermen in the draft, with our top pick in particular, our first round pick. Now, where are the needs for the Kraken? How long do we have? Well, this is a 30-minute-ish show, so we're going to keep it pretty close. I think that I would like to see the Seattle Kraken take a defenseman high in the draft. I said that last year, and it didn't happen. Zeev Buium was the pick that I was looking for. But what do we think about this draft? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I know we've talked about the draft a little bit, and we'll start to ramp up again here as we get closer and closer to the actual draft day. But you'll get to hear in just a moment from Sebastian, and he's breaking down the overall draft itself, the prospects that we know are available, and then you will hear what Sebastian says regarding the 8th overall pick. So then later on the show, we're going to talk about other potential picks for the Seattle Kraken, what we're seeing in other mock drafts, and then we'll close out the show talking about, we'll close out the show with me reading some comments with regard to Lane Lambert potentially being the lead candidate for the Seattle Kraken head coaching job. I know the rundown might look a little different on the graphic, but that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about Sebastian's pick for the Seattle Kraken, other picks and other mock drafts, and then we'll close hearing from you. What do you think? Are the Seattle Kraken a perennial playoff team or close to it? How close is close? What does ASAP, as soon as possible, mean? Yeah, we'll get into all of that. But here is what Sebastian has to say about this draft class overall, and then who gets picked at 8.
So we'll be doing a full big mock draft with all 32 picks of the first round. So we're going to keep this a pretty high pace, a bit of a rapid fire episode here. We're not going to be delving into the in-depth details of the games of every single prospect here. More just going to be a quick little elevator pitch of what makes this prospect stand out, why they fit with that team, and quickly move on to the next, because again, we've got 32 teams and 32 players to get through here today. There's a lot of high-end prospects to talk about here in the 2025 NHL draft. It's not the strongest draft that we've seen in recent memory, but there's definitely quite a bit of high-end talent here, especially for the top 10 teams selecting on draft day. Number 8, we have the Seattle Kraken selecting, and if Roger McQueen is available here, I think he'd be a really intriguing option here for the Kraken. They need a level of dynamism and skill and power in their forward core that they lack a little bit, especially among youth talent. I mean, you have guys like Beniers and Wright drafted in the last 5 years who bring good two-way impacts down the middle, but with Roger McQueen, what you get is just a true swing for the fences. And on top of a guy like Berkeley Catton, I think you have a lot of different elements in that core among forwards that could play really wonderfully off of each other. And again, with McQueen, you just get the highest skill guy left on the board here at this stage. And that's what the Kraken should be vying, in my opinion.
So that's what Sebastian says. If McQueen is available, of course, that's a big if. But here's what everything prior to the 8th pick in the Locked On NHL Prospects mock draft looks like. Schaefer, Misa. At number 4, Caleb Desnoyers, James Hagens, Brady Martin, and Porter Martone. Those are the picks ahead of the Seattle Kraken pick at 8 for the Locked On NHL mock draft. And just so we complete the full first round, you can see some of the picks here. And we're going to talk about some of these guys, including who the NHL prospects team has going immediately following McQueen. And so it's going to be really interesting to see if any of these mock drafts hold. But coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken, again, we're going to talk about other potential picks. Some of these guys I might have mentioned a time or two, and I definitely know from our commenters, our everydayers, our OGers, that y'all have some picks that you definitely want me to touch base on. We're not going to do a deep dive until next month. So like in a few days, we'll start doing deeper dives, but this is just, something that happened on our network. I wanted to address the news here and get your thoughts. So let me know in the comments. Here we go again. Roger McQueen at 8 in the Locked On NHL Prospects mock draft. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And let me know in the comments. Coming up, we're going to talk about what other experts are saying with regard to the Kraken's 8th overall pick for the second consecutive draft. And then, of course, I will get to your comments from last episode talking about Lane Lambert, but overall, just where the Seattle Kraken stand. Some really interesting comments that I want to break down. That's coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. If you are looking for a snack that packs a protein punch and is delicious and nutritious, then you need to go with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10%. That's right, 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller for longer. Now, no fret if you like the shell version or shellless. Wonderful Pistachios has you covered. There are grab and go options with the no shells Wonderful Pistachio that make it super easy. But if you still like that Zen style of cracking open a shell and getting to your Wonderful Pistachios, they've got you covered there as well. So get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken your first listen of the day. Erica L. Ayala here, and you heard from Sebastian in the latest Locked On NHL Prospects mock draft. They want to go with McQueen for the Seattle Kraken. Again, here's that top 10. Roger McQueen, a centerman, at that option. And, we've heard McQueen in a few mock drafts, definitely someone who people think could be good for the Seattle Kraken. And I'm going to take you to The Athletic. Now, here's the one little wrinkle that we have to say about McQueen And it is something that I'm looking at The Athletic in one of their mock drafts. Let's see which version exactly. This is mock draft for the first round. This is from today. So this is brand new. And Roger McQueen has suffered an injury that left him out of action for a little bit. Played with the Wheat Kings, and there was a little bit of controversy, maybe mild controversy with regard to what the injury actually was. Was it a bulged disc, this, that, and the third? But it is an injury that is significant enough that he missed some time. And so a lot of people, including The Athletic, saying, hey, a little bit of a caveat. The commentary here is this one all comes down to the medical. But the Kraken, with a stocked system of young centers, are in a great position to take this swing on a player who would go higher than this on pure talent. So what people are saying or guesstimating is that because of McQueen's injury, that might knock him down to even make him available at 8. So that's really interesting here. He is a centerman that comes in at 6'5", 197. So, he has a combination of size, skill, and skating that is rare if he hits, is what The Athletic is saying. NHL.com also had a mock draft where they had Mike Morial alongside and Adam Killerman do make their picks. And so 2 different names. And so if we look at the NHL list, we have Caleb Desnoyers is Kilmerman's pick. High offensive game with the ability to compete against the opposition's best player. Sounds like some guys that we have, specifically thinking of Matty Beniers and his line. He's an outstanding skater with high hockey IQ who is almost always in the right position in all 3 zones. I love hearing that. All 3 zones? Yeah, give me more of that. Now, Kilmerman goes on to say that high-skilled players meet what we've seen from the Kraken in their past few picks, including Berkeley Catton, Edward Shala, Desnoyers, quote, is the type of forward who will help get the most out of those players while contributing in a big way himself. Now, this definitely sounds like the Seattle Kraken. This is their MO, their bread and butter. And I wonder if it's time to maybe switch up the approach here. And that's why I find Mike Morial's pick really interesting. Number one, it's a defenseman, not a centerman. And it's Rodim Mertka, who I've mentioned in passing before, someone that I've seen associated with the Seattle Kraken, a defenseman who's playing for the Thunderbirds right now in the WHL, for the Seattle Thunderbirds. And so there's that familiarity. But here's what Morial says about Mertka. Right shot defenseman, 6'6", 207, born in Czechia. If you listen to my international hockey coverage, I'm really high on Czechia and what they're doing with their hockey teams and hockey federation overall. Says he's hard to miss, possesses great hockey sense and competitiveness. 17-year-old is considered a 2-way defenseman whose upside is too good to pass up. And Mertka had 35 points, 3 goals, and 32 assists in 40 games. So for Seattle. So Mertka is a nice pick. Now, interesting enough, similarly to our Locked On NHL Prospects pick, Kilmerman has Mertka going to Buffalo at 9. And I just want to read what he said about Mertka because we're talking about him. And he talks about, again, him being a centerman that can skate and move the puck the way and can move the puck well. The direct quote is, it's not often a team has a chance to add a giant right shot defenseman who can skate and move the puck the way Mertka can. I love that. Giant right shot defenseman. He's got good size. He's got weight on him. He's played for the top pro league in his native Czechia. He came to North America looking for more ice time and took advantage of it. I love that. He's got some moxie, some sandpaper, perhaps. He's been showcasing his outstanding skating and growing offensive game. Defensively, he can use his long stick to keep forwards to the outside or break up plays on the rush. I mean, of these three guys, Mertka's probably the pick that I would take because I've said it since even last season. I want to see the Seattle Kraken take a defenseman. What are your thoughts? Do you agree with our experts at Locked On NHL Prospects and Sebastian saying that we should take McQueen? Do you like Desnoyers or Mertka? Or is there someone else? And I know there are a few names that have been put out there, and don't worry, we'll get to some other names. I wanted to go over our internal mock draft, our most updated mock draft. I can't imagine that it will be the last before the actual draft day, so stick with us here at Locked On NHL, Locked On NHL Prospects, and of course on Locked On Seattle Kraken, where we will specifically talk about the Kraken moves and things of that nature. But coming up, I do want to go to some of your comments because we did an episode yesterday talking about what we're hearing is that Lane Lambert is in the driver's seat, so to speak, or in the first in the queue, if you will, for the vacancy for the Seattle Kraken head coaching position. And I asked a few different questions, including, are we ready to be a perennial playoff team? Do you like Lane Lambert? And some of you even went beyond the questions that I asked yesterday. So many great comments. I wanted to talk about it. We'll do that as we close out today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Thank you again for joining me on this episode of Locked On Kraken. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, bringing you your favorite team every single day. Your favorite team in hockey, at least, is the Seattle Kraken. Okay, so many great comments. I wanted to get to them. We've got some folks that are regular commenters. We've got some new folks in here. But remember, yesterday's episode was on Lane Lambert. Hearing that he is first in the queue, so to speak, for the new head coaching job as of last week. The Seattle Kraken had not made any offers, or at least that's what Jason Butterill said in the season ticket holder Q&A that we talked about earlier this week. But here's what George C. Kraken had to say. And again, one of the things that we continue to hear is that the Seattle Kraken are or want to be a perennial playoff team. And this came from the article that I talked about from the Seattle Times. Fantastic article, highly recommend it, because the nugget there in that article is that the Kraken maybe believe that they are closer to being a perennial playoff team than the rest of the NHL does. And how does that impact the coaching hire? In case you didn't listen to yesterday's episode, which you absolutely should listen to Tuesday's episode. George C. Kraken, this is certainly not close to being a perennial contender. Well, George, tell us how you really feel. But I like this part. We need to keep building towards that rather than forcing it with rushed, poorly aging contracts. Hey, listen, I know a lot of everydayers, OGers of the Locked On Kraken show had a lot of concerns regarding some of the contracts that we divvied out. As I like to say, the 7 and 7 that we gave, the Chandler Stevenson contract. Again, he had a better showing on the back end of the season, but there were times during last season where we were like, we're working with this for the next, 6 seasons after this. So, we'll have to see if Chandler Stevenson now with a little more comfort can get into good stride. Brandon Montour, I think, has looked good. Will that contract stand and hold water? Anyone know that movie? Oh, it's such a good movie. My Cousin Vinny. Will it hold water? Will that be a good contract? Anyway, George goes on to say, I do think the Kraken head coach position has to be among the least desirable in the league. 3 coaches in 5 years, and they promoted the man most at fault for the lack of success. Now, earlier, I kind of, I chuckled a little bit because I actually was listening back to the episode where Dan Bylsma got fired. It's still the pinned episode on our Locked On Kraken YouTube channel, and for good reason, because I'm still trying to make heads or tails of it. But that what George is saying in this comment, the 3 coaches in 5 years and the promotion of Ron Francis, yeah, that is still mind-boggling to me, but I do agree that it might be, if not the least desirable, one of the least desirable. And I said it yesterday. I've said it on several episodes, really since Dan Bylsma was fired, that there's so much. I have so many questions about the vision, the intentions, and the capabilities of not just the front office, but even how the roster is constructed. And that's without even knowing who the next head coach is. So this is why I tend to agree with George here. And I've said this, right? The new head coach has to imagine they are going to be a source of blame for ownership, front office, and will be looking for a new job if playoffs aren't reached year 1. If it kind of feels that way. And again, if this is a team, a franchise that's saying, it's not a rebuild is what we're hearing. We want to be a playoff team as soon as possible, but no one really knows what as soon as possible means. Is it literal or otherwise? And so, yes, this notion that a new head coach is in the hot seat immediately, I don't think that's a far stretch. That's why I said absolutely not. Jessica Campbell should not be the next head coach. But who can step into that and just be a glutton for punishment for the most part? George says a lot of other things here, but ends with saying, hoping for a coach more on the developing young prospects side. And that's something I broke down again with some of the candidates that are available. How many of those that are available are good on developing young prospects, which seems to be at least one thing that everyone in the organization agrees upon. Now, do we all see that playing out the same way? I guess we'll find out, but at least everyone agrees there. Okay, I want to get to 2 more comments here. Now, Striatic, very loyal listener, an insider. Thank you so much, Striatic, for always chiming in. Striatic, the longer this process draws out and the more coaches seemingly rejecting the Kraken, the more depressing this gets. Yeah. What was it? 4 or 5 people that had been linked to the Kraken now hired elsewhere. This is another part. And again, I was rewatching the Dan Bylsma out thing where, as I was recording that, and then I saw the news, I was saying, you don't get rid of Bylsma. You give him another year, very short leash, but you don't get rid of him. And then I had to stop that recording and be like, well, we fired the guy. Actually, today's the anniversary of when we hired Dan Bylsma. And I also said in that episode, me reacting to Dan Bylsma being fired, that he didn't even get to his anniversary. I feel like we've been talking about this, for like a month? Over a month. End of the season. We've been talking about this for over a month, and we don't have a new head coach. Striatic goes on to say, keeping Bylsma another year instead of acting rashly would have been better, even just to demonstrate to the next potential coach that this team won't toss them in a year. That's 2 different comments from George and Striatic now saying that everything, all signs point to this new coach, if they are not successful, they are out the door, which is so wild. That's so wild to me. I never thought the organization would be in this position. And hopefully we're all wrong. But you got to prove it at this point because there's just a lot going on. Okay, I promised just 3. There were other comments here, including about Quenneville, someone popping in as a Flyers fan talking about that. We do have a comment saying that hopefully Lane Lambert is the guy. But here's where I want to end for today. Hockey in Washington, or hockey in WA. made a comment earlier about Rodim Mertka saying that, maybe we just wait to see if Rod is available. Of course, is with the Hurricanes, but we'll see how the playoffs pan out. Said really wanted Dave Carl, but he re-upped with Denver. We did talk about that on a previous episode. That hits the mark when it comes to what George and I want, which is to develop young talent, saying if not Rodim Mertka would settle for Mitch Love, someone I talked about yesterday a little bit there. If we are looking for another head coach in the spring, I think we should take 10 sticks of dynamite and get rid of Francis and look for a GM with more experience. I mean, it's just wild to me that even though each one of these comments has its own little flavor, all of us, right? At least in these comments, and me, I'm including myself, and I'm sure we're not the only ones, but from the comments that I highlighted just for today, we have other comments we can get to, and please keep sending your comments. We'll incorporate them into the show. But all of the comments and what you've been hearing me say, there is a concern. There is a concern that we're putting ourselves in a position to just once again have to hire a new head coach come next season. That is wild to me. And I don't see, unless there is a path that I'm not familiar with, which I don't like, hey, prove me wrong. But all of us are seeing this as a like, hey, what are we doing? Do we have enough pieces to attract talent? Are we on the same page? And if we're not, are we going to make a decision that we're then going to have to divorce ourselves from in less than a year? Because apparently, some of those reports that we were hearing on 32 Thoughts, maybe there was something there. In hindsight, Ron Francis made that proclamation, he's my guy, and then fires his guy. What are we doing? And that press conference that we talked about, and maybe I was a little bit kinder than I need be. We might need to readdress that. I think I was still in shock. But that press conference where it was just like, yeah, we made this decision, and sure, the path of least resistance, I think, is what we were hearing. The path of least resistance would have been to keep the coach, but we didn't want to do that. We can do better. Okay, cool, tight. The only way that makes sense and that history absolves that decision is if there were things happening under Dan Bylsma's tenure, or even coming from Dan himself, that were too big of a mess to ignore. And, I'm not saying that's what happened. I certainly hope that's not the case. If that was the case and there were things that were just not conducive and were unacceptable in a work environment happening, then sure, you make a change and you nip it in the bud. That's not the energy that I seem to be getting, is that we had to protect our players. We had to protect our staff. That's not the energy that I'm getting from this. I told you once, I'll tell you again, the energy that I'm getting from this is that there was a power struggle somewhere. I wouldn't be surprised if it was between the coaching staff or some people, Dan Bylsma in particular, since he's the one who's out the door. Was there a power struggle between Bylsma and some of the players? Plausible. I talked about that throughout the season. Was there a difference of opinion between Ron Francis and Dan Bylsma? That had been reported. It was poo-pooed. But then, he fires, air quote, his guy. Was there something else happening between the coaching staff and specifically Dan Bylsma and the ownership group? Or is it a little bit of all of those things? I don't know. But unless it was, hey, we have a zero tolerance policy, we do not do this, I'm not sure that you can say that there wasn't some kind of miscommunication, some kind of potential power struggle, and something that a relationship, a working relationship, a meeting of the minds that was not, a working relationship that could not be mended. Hopefully, I really hope, and I don't think it was anything regarding any poor treatment. I really hope that's not the case. And if the Kraken had to move on from that, then the Kraken had to move on from that. But I think it's more about leadership dynamics is my gut here. But if those don't get sorted, if there's not clear communication moving forward, how do we then stop ourselves from repeating history? We've got a lot of questions to be answered, and we will do that here as we keep soldiering on here at Locked On Kraken. Again, I am your host, Erica L. Ayala. I will be with you here as your host of Locked On Kraken. You can also find me on CBSSports.com as a writer, part of the editorial team, or on CBS Sports HQ. You can also, and you should, make sure you are tuned in to Locked On NHL. Not only do we have our game night shows until the Stanley Cup is hoisted, but we also have, of course, the Women's Hockey Report. I am your co-host there alongside Rachel Donner, where we are diving into the PWHL and International Women's Game. Congratulations again to the Minnesota Frost, their second Walter Cup, back-to-back titles in this brand new league. Ottawa Charge were the runners-up, so to speak. Great final. Every game went to at least one overtime. Just great hockey. And I can't wait to see what's coming up. We do have a GM. I've talked about that for the Seattle PWHL Seattle team, and we will hear from that GM later this week. So that means we will talk about it later this week on Locked On Kraken. Be kind to yourselves. Be kind to one another. Thank you so much for the comments. Keep them coming. We'll incorporate them into the show, especially now that we're in the off season. We'll talk more about mock drafts, but you know how we do. We hold fast, we stay true, and loud and proud we say, let's go Kraken. I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.